Imagine being married to the most iconic man on the planet, worshipped by millions, adored on every stage. Yet behind closed doors, you're left waiting, wondering, and shut out. Priscilla Presley lived that reality. A single controlling rule made by Elvis would quietly unravel everything they had built together. It wasn't just distance, it was deliberate. And what started as a choice for convenience quickly spiraled into something far more painful. What was this one decision that changed everything? You're about to find out. They were the couple that seemed to have it all: beauty, fame, fortune. Priscilla and Elvis Presley were icons in their own right, yet behind the glamour and flashbulbs, their marriage was far more fragile than anyone realized. While the world watched their every move, the real story unfolded quietly in the spaces between headlines, in hotel rooms, and on nights when silence filled the Graceland halls. From the very beginning, their love existed in a bubble of adoration and pressure, magnified by the weight of being married to a man the world refused to share. As Elvis's career reignited in the early 1970s, everything changed. After a lull in live performances, he returned to the stage with a fire and a grueling schedule that consumed his life. Endless tours, back-to-back shows, and barely a breath between cities meant Elvis was always on the move. Fans cheered, arenas sold out, and his legend grew larger by the mile. But while Elvis basked in the spotlight, someone was left behind in the shadows. Priscilla watched the man she married drift further away, not just physically, but emotionally. The distance wasn't just miles on a map. It was hours not called, plans not made, and memories not shared. And with each passing tour, that emotional gap widened. Priscilla wasn't just missing her husband. She was missing a connection that once anchored her. The long nights, the unanswered questions, the slow unraveling of intimacy, each one took a toll. What happens when the person you love is always out of reach, even when you're holding on to the very idea of them? What invisible decision began to change everything in their relationship? The answer isn't what you'd expect, and it's coming. There was a rule, unspoken at first, then painfully clear. A rule that drew a line between life on the road and life at home. Elvis, the man the world revered, had set a boundary few dared to question. No wives on tour. Not just a preference, but a firm policy. While to outsiders it might have seemed like a logistical decision, to those closest to him, especially Priscilla, it felt like something much heavier. The road, filled with bright lights and thunderous applause, was closed off to the women who loved the men who traveled it. At first, the explanation sounded reasonable. Touring, after all, was exhausting. Non-stop performances, tight schedules, and the pressure to entertain. Elvis insisted that keeping the atmosphere focused and free of distractions was necessary. But what started as a practical concern slowly took on another tone. For Priscilla, the absence began to sting in places she hadn't expected. When someone tells you they miss you but still chooses to stay away, the message isn't just in their words, it's in their actions. And those actions started to weigh more than the excuses could carry. It wasn't just Priscilla who was pushed to the sidelines. The other wives, those of the crew, band members, and close friends, were also excluded. Elvis didn't want the emotional pull of spouses disrupting what he saw as a well-oiled, male-dominated machine. But while the guys continued on with their camaraderie, laughter, and late-night routines, the women were left waiting at home, in a kind of emotional purgatory. The rule wasn't just about keeping things simple. It reshaped relationships, strained marriages, and left more than one heart quietly breaking. Priscilla tried to make sense of it all. "We talked constantly of being together more," she would later recall. And yet, the more they spoke of closing the gap, the wider it seemed to stretch. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. A man who claimed to want her near, but created a system that ensured she stayed far away. For Priscilla, the rule became more than just a boundary. It became a symbol of everything unspoken between them, everything slipping through their fingers. And she wasn't wrong to worry. Priscilla did what many do when love starts to slip through their fingers. She tried to adapt. If she couldn't be there full time, she'd make the most of the moments she was allowed. Quick flights to Las Vegas, a few nights tucked into the whirlwind of tour life, stolen glimpses of a world that seemed to move further out of reach each time she arrived. She smiled through opening nights, stood proud as Elvis took the stage, and tried, desperately, to believe that these scattered moments could hold them together. But with every trip, the gap between them only felt more pronounced. Something wasn't right. The warmth she once knew was harder to find, buried under glitz and stage lights. There were things she couldn't put into words, looks that lingered too long in the crowd, half-spoken excuses, phone calls that felt too brief. It wasn't just the distance anymore. It was doubt. Alone in hotel rooms, Priscilla's mind filled with questions she couldn't ask and answers she wasn't sure she wanted. The woman who once stood by the king of rock and roll now felt more like a guest in his world, welcomed but not needed. The silence between them was no longer a pause. It was becoming the new rhythm. And then, just when she thought the space between them couldn't stretch any further, Elvis made a request, one that would shift everything again. It wasn't framed as a rejection, but it landed like one. A quiet suggestion that echoed louder than any argument. One that would turn brief visits into rare appearances and leave Priscilla wondering if she was truly part of the life he was building, or just a chapter he had already begun turning the page on. There's a particular kind of pain that comes not from absence, but from being asked to stay away. Just when Priscilla thought she had adjusted to their fractured routine, Elvis introduced a new condition. He no longer wanted her flying in when she could. He wanted her only at the bookends. Opening night, closing night. That was it. A sanitized version of connection, stripped of spontaneity and intimacy. It felt less like a compromise and more like a carefully curated performance, one that kept her at a comfortable distance. For Priscilla, the request hit deeper than words could say. It wasn't just about attending fewer shows. It was about being slowly pushed out of a life she once shared. Her heart didn't just ache, it questioned. What was really happening between those two shows? What was she not supposed to see? As she packed her suitcase with the knowledge that her visits were now scheduled like calendar obligations, her mind began to race. The man she loved, the man who once made her feel like the center of his universe, was now controlling her presence like a stage cue, and it hurt. It was the day Elvis suggested I come to Vegas less often that I became really upset and suspicious, Priscilla would later write, summing up what had been growing inside her for months. That line wasn't just a memory, it was a turning point, a quiet shift where doubt overpowered devotion, and where the story of their love became less about shared dreams and more about silent questions. What was he shielding her from? And why did it feel like her place in his world was no longer a priority, but an inconvenience? Beneath the glitter of the stage and the roar of the crowd, there was an unspoken rule guiding everything behind the scenes, one rooted not in necessity, but in control. Over time, the carefully curated justifications began to unravel, revealing a truth that stung far more than distance ever could. Elvis wasn't just trying to simplify tour life. His decision to keep Priscilla and every other wife away was about preserving something else entirely. A lifestyle, a rhythm of freedom and indulgence that didn't fit the image of a devoted husband or family man. He had crafted an environment backstage that ran like a closed circle, a brotherhood, a fortress, a playground where loyalty was measured in proximity and participation. Wives, with their quiet glances and steady expectations, disrupted that flow. Elvis noticed it all. The distraction, the split attention, the way his crew shifted when their partners were nearby. It wasn't convenient, it wasn't fun. So, in a sweeping move, he decided to remove the complication altogether. It wasn't personal, he told himself. It was business. But to the women waiting at home, it felt anything but neutral. He knew if he let me join, he couldn't refuse the others. So he banned us all, Priscilla wrote with a clarity sharpened by hindsight. Those words weren't bitter, they were resigned. They echoed with the realization that love had been overridden by loyalty to something else. Not to her, not even to their marriage, but to an image, a dynamic, a life built on the terms of one man's comfort. And in that decision, something vital slipped away. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Closing nights were supposed to be a celebration. The curtain call to a successful run, the final crescendo before the lights dimmed. But for Priscilla, they brought something else entirely. a pit in her stomach, a dread she couldn't quite explain. As she sat in the audience, the stage lit with glamour and charisma, her eyes scanned the front rows. Beautiful women, carefully placed, perfectly styled, positioned like ornaments in Elvis's line of sight. It was no accident. The flirtation, the showmanship, it was part of the routine. But for Priscilla, it wasn't just a performance. It was a slow unraveling. Each smile Elvis tossed into the crowd, each lyric directed with a pointed gaze, became a question mark in her mind. Was this just part of the act, or was something deeper unfolding in the shadows she couldn't see? Her suspicions weren't born out of paranoia, but out of patterns. Too many nights apart. Too many whispers left unanswered. And worst of all, no space to voice the ache growing quietly inside her. She watched, she waited, and she wondered. Her love buried under layers of performance and silence. But they never talked about it. That perhaps was the most painful part. There were no confrontations, no dramatic exchanges, no emotional outbursts, just an unspoken understanding that this was the cost of the life they had chosen. It was never openly addressed because it didn't have to be. It had become, in Elvis's world, simply part of the job. And Priscilla, caught between love and silence, was left to carry the weight of everything that was never said. It's a haunting contrast. The man who could hold thousands in the palm of his hand, who lit up arenas with every note and smile, couldn't seem to stay grounded in the one place that truly needed him. Behind the velvet curtains and roaring applause was a home left quiet, a wife left wondering, and a love quietly shifting out of focus. The king of rock and roll had mastered the art of performance, but when it came to presence, the kind that matters in a marriage, he often vanished like smoke under the spotlight. The louder the world cheered, the more distant he seemed to become. And so, we're left to ask, was all of this truly about maintaining his image, preserving the energy of a demanding career? Or was there something more, a fear of vulnerability, a refusal to be fully seen by the one person who loved him without an audience? As the story unfolds, one question lingers like an unfinished song. Was Elvis trying to protect his success, or was he hiding something much deeper? If this story moved you or made you see things in a new light, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps more people discover these untold chapters. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the real stories behind the legends. And most importantly, we want to hear from you. What do you think was really going on behind the scenes? Share your thoughts, theories, and reactions in the comments below. Let's talk about it.